parents, are always a positive notion or cause for most of us. For the ones of the contradiction, the world might be a sadder place to be than you might probably imagine. The manga starts with our protagonist being choked by his father himself. A life of torture, trauma and pain. Screaming and gnawing at his father's arm, making any attempts he can to free himself. His father was a drug addict who wishes to injure his very own son, to claim insurance money, and pay off his debts. Our protagonist was a miserable and woeful child, from whom things were always taken away. His father exclaims in pain as he washes his hurt arm, wishing his son just took some pills and died instead of struggling every time. While his father washes away his limb, his son repeats a single line again and again. "Not my fault. Not my fault. Not my fault." While his father is explaining how he has already contacted the insurance agency and plans to next time throw him from the stairs to make sure his neck breaks. Yu, our piteous protagonist, while hiding and crying under the dinner table, abruptly disappears. And awakes in a vast and unknown turf. Astonished, he stumbles down, finding he was on a pile of corpses, men, women and monsters alike. Wind blows past him, ruffling his hair, and he spots a lady, quite of an old stature, looking at him. He asks her to say something if she has to already. She does, but sadly, in an odd language. He repeats himself, while trying to ask where he was. Finally, he faints. End of Chapter 0. Chapter 1. Yu awakes in a foreign establishment. The lady, right beside him, almost exclaiming that he is awake already. He is baffled yet again. He can understand her, although he can confirm she isn't speaking Japanese, his native language. She asserts him to call her as Stella Fado. While eating some grub, he comes to know that after passing out in the woods, Stella had brought him to her abode. He was a rare child, for there were no beings, human or monster, in the entire continent with black hair and eyes. They existed, but farther away in another continent. He begins to spot characters, letters and numbers floating around Stella, and confirms that he no longer was on the Earth he knew. The manga cuts to another scene where he is shoved down to the ground. While working as an adventurer, he is called a black-haired goblin by others, being mistreated yet again. He had signed up for a mission of picking herbs since he was a weak adventurer. After the ruckus made by him and the adventurers, specifically Hage, his pay is nabbed by a chunk, claiming he had to pay for the damages. People discriminated against him and refrained from selling, talking or even giving him work, here too, much alike his previous forlorn past. He is determined to kill them one day. With no equipment whatsoever, he ponders of how he can earn wealth and power to strengthen his own physical and social status. He cannot fight stronger animals or monsters without armor nor alone. While on his way back, he spots a clash between goblins and Hage, the adventurer guy from a while back. He watches them overpower the goblins by using something strange. Magic, he concludes. With a sliver of hope, he wonders if he too someday can use it. A sudden day, he is yet again in a painful predicament. When he once again goes for the grass collection mission, he gets beaten up by Hage. Punches far and near battered his face and body alike. Turns out, everyone who hated him had assigned Hage to beat him up. He recalls the past, being beaten and injured by his father, in the very same manner. He hates, totally despises being treated such poorly. He is thrown off on the barren dirt road and starts laughing frantically. While swearing to kill them off one day and with a vow to steal everything away from the world, he approaches the poultry barns, where besides pigs, monsters like orcs, which are captured from raids and battles, are imprisoned. With a plan in mind he smiles. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. While on his return, he hears Stella calling out for him in the woods, a while far off from the city. She asks of why he was delayed and of his bruised body. He assures her and asks her not to worry, for his certain plan would soon bear fruit. The plan he had in mind was quite simple. The captive orcs had slave collars around their necks. These collars forced them to obey humans. The next days, while Hage and the others at the city guild decided to hunt, you followed them sneakily. When Hage gets separated from his team, you hits goblins and orcs with stones and lures them to Hage. While the mighty Hage is busy drowned in his strength, overpowering monsters one by one, but he notices his quick exhaustion due to the increased number of monsters. He utilizes his magic and physical skills slashing round and about, when of a sudden, he is hit by a goblin mage, with a fireball and panics. With their numbers growing momentarily thanks to the protagonist, Hage now is being pushed back. In this nick of surprise, a goblin manages to land a slash on him which he shockingly survives. He exclaims that he is saved, thinking he still has a chance. And a heavy stone, hurled at his face, throws him off balance and on his back. Yu approaches the crawling Hage, thankful that he is still alive. He sets use of the stone in hand, smashing and killing off his sworn enemy. Finally, after taking away Hage's equipment, skills and life, he returns to the guild. The receptionist repeats of how he wouldn't protect him like when he threw him yesterday. Again, when he gets into trouble, Yu shoves the sword up towards his face, demanding his pay and inquiring if he recognizes the sword. After a moment of realization and shock, the guy pays him his right and our protagonist leaves the guild, well almost before busting into the bust of a woman. Using his otherworldly magic he identifies her to be Nina Reba, a strong female adventurer at the same guild. She offers to be his friend, which he straightforwardly declines. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Nina follows you on his way back home, constantly being declined on her offers of friendship. She mentions how he was banned from entering the town, much less the guild, and is also being overworked at home by Stella. At the mention of Stella's name, he is agitated and inquired her of how she heard of that name. She is eventually spanked hard by our protagonist, which surprisingly earns a reaction he didn't quite expect, and asks the masochistic cow to go away. He returns home to Stella and asks if he could buy a hammer and saw to level up his new blacksmithing skill he gained from killing Hage. Being banned from the town, he sets to hunt demons in the forest. With his newfound gear and strength. After killing a few demons, he comes across a Madogu or magic jewel and is finally able to use magic for the first time in the form of a basic fireball. Back at his home, Nina reaches out and finds Stella and identifies herself as Yu's friend. Stella asks her to befriend the lonely Yu and guide him. Nina suddenly shows up behind him, which baffles him. She yet again offers to be his friend. Hearing this, he storms off irritated and confused, for he never had a friend before. He reaches the barn and gets the tools he needs to dig up a place to create a bath, and simultaneously hone his blacksmith skills. Nina approaches yet again and he asks what will he benefit by befriending her. She states of how they both could enter a Sankin no Dukutsu, which translates to a grotto among the mountains. A place outside the town where they could hunt demons, and she could sell the magic stones hence earned in the town, and he could earn some money. Realizing and re-estimating the worth of the cow, he agrees to the deal but refrains from abiding with the friendship. The pair moves the scene to the dungeon-like territory. They notice a pack of goblins, armed with equipments of variable kinds and in a formation, very unlike their usual unintelligent behavior. After slaughtering the goblin monsters, they descend the dungeon a further while and then return after having a good look around. When Nina is a tad bit late than the promised time, he searches for her the next morning. He finds her apprehended by Hage's two lackeys. Statistically, she was capable enough to defeat them, but at the bad-mouthing of Yu, she couldn't take it being his friend. She gets distracted, and consequently hit by the two guys. Yu arrives to the rescue, slaughtering the staggering duo instantaneously. He affirms that he saved her since he considered her a true friend. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The pair returns to Stella's home and sit to eat after a timely cleanup. Yu notices that Stella was eating less than her usual portion and ascertains that her vitality wasn't as well the past few days. Stella mentions how throughout the village the talk of bandits and kidnappings, asking him to stay careful. After the concise meal, Yu and Nina set out to train in magic. She was yet to learn of it and he was ought to show her the ropes of magic. After a while, Yu plans to go selling a few potions he had concocted in a neighboring village. At a place called the Ishkiri Field, while he was wondering if he had lost his way, a voice calls out to him. It was a man with quite decent skills and stats. He peeks into his stats using his unique skill and finds the potent skill Hawkeye, a foresight-oriented skill he plans to acquire. He confirms that he was lost while looking for herbs and asks him to help him out. The man agrees suspiciously. After a while, the man notices of how, despite being a village boy, Yu was able to keep up with his pace and movement sturdy. With his suspicions confirmed, he attacks him. With a level 7 difference between them of 15 and 8, the man, now a confirmed bandit, observes a fight stance. Yu calls forth his own magic, which astonishes and scares the bandit. The bandit makes a futile attempt to get a critical hit, but all in vain. Yu in the meanwhile gains yet another skill from him, short sword skill level 1, critical blow. While the bandit begs for mercy and forgiveness, Yu tests his newly obtained skill on him. He breaks into the hideout and seeps past the rooms, finding it now a tad bit empty. He moves to the last room and finds himself a reasonable answer to the building's vacancy. Nina had been tailing him for quite a while now. Albeit they don't come across any people, they did find a treasury with various expensive odds and ends. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The scene opens with a high-spirited Nina with 2 new daggers from the bandit's chest, and a curious Yu, on their way to the dungeon. Turns out, she considers them a gift from him and is overjoyed. The pair scurries past the now usual goblins in the dungeon, hoping for the monotonous journey to end and start discussing about boss monsters, while Nina fights off a pack of goblins and our protagonist Yu gets busy brewing potions. He had also finished the bath using his blacksmithing and carpentry back home. He discloses his secret build to Stella. With a wet but warm gaze, she admires the project of his and thanks him since they wouldn't need to go to the distant river now. He had created it with Stella's deteriorating vitality in his mind. After she is done using it first, Yu plans on taking a soak next. As usual, Nina asks to follow, asserting that it's more fun with 2 people in a bath rather than 1. Yu begs to disagree. While the pair strips, Yu secretly hopes she isn't a pervert. Eventually, as he undresses, Nina is shocked at the sight of the myriad injuries on Yu's body, reflecting an unknown past of his. She wondered of with a pitiful gaze. She had heard of his injuries from Stella from the time she had picked up the unconscious Yu. After the bath with the asleep Yu beside her, she is thrown into a torrent of emotions, of sympathy and curiosity alike. After a while, they yet again enter the dungeon for their usual practice and cash. Suddenly, Nina is alarmed. She asks Yu to bend over and silently follow her with his stealth skill active. She had spotted the boss monster of the dungeon in a distance descent. A rank 3 ogre. A named monster, of threatening strength but few skills, roaming around a bunch of other lower subspecies. They quickly resort to retreating, and get on their way back home. When they almost reach the doorstep, they spot a figure. Sprawled on the ground, lay Stella. The panicked pair sprint, calling Stella's name. She wakes up after a while. Thinking she was strong enough to move about a little, she had collapsed from weakness. She apologizes for making them worry. A frustrated Yu runs out to go search for some medicinal herbs he could use to help her improve. He had sadly sold all his potions to the traveling merchants earlier. With him gone, Nina and Stella sit to have a brief talk. They discuss of his brutal scars and family. He had previously said he had none, but Stella knew better. She knew what kind of a hellish life he had been through. She proudly claims that she knows of the adventurous journeys of his. Of the weapons and equipment he used to store in the barn. Which comes as a news to Nina. When Nina tries to be optimistic in a consoling way, she states that she won't be cured by no medicine, potion or magic. It wasn't a disease. It was life. Stella, saddened for a while, wonders of the childish Yu, trying to act and enact like an adult in front of her from time to time. In the dungeon, Yu is searching persistently for a skill. A skill that might help him cure Stella. An adventurer, unknowing of his presence inside, enters the vicinity. He spots the numerous decapitated and maimed demon bodies sprawled on the ground, as if slaughtered by a monstrous entity. He was capable enough to derive by seeing the countless bodies that they were done in recently. He hears clashing of swords and screeches of demons a bit further and sneaks, only to find the demon child of the Resser village, Yu slashing and slaughtering scores of monsters. The frightening sight shakes him up. Yu finds himself hurled against the level 3 boss ogre they'd spotted the last time. He attempts to attack the giant, only to be thrown flying across the cavern, breaking his hand in the process. Back home, Stella now speaks, in a staggering speech. Asking Nina to look after the piteous Yu, after she's gone. And is thankful when she agrees in response. When a moment of silence passes, Nina understands that Stella was no more. She had passed away in the absence of Yu. Back at the demon cavern, Yu heals himself using his skill he had stole at some point of time in the past since coming to this world. When the ogre charges at him with his cane, Yu manages to dodge the hit, and with his equipped longsword springs towards the giant's head, impaling it in his right eye, piercing through it and beyond. He looks at the other lackeys nearby, knowing what awaited them now since their boss was dead. After a while passes, he returns home. Only to find a sobbing Nina. He wasn't welcomed with the usual joyous and warm smile of old lady Stella. Nor did she apologize for her incompetence. She just lay there, covered in a canopy of sheet, silently. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Yu desperately tries helping Stella to a potion he had returned with. He calls her name, wailing, tears dripping the face of them both. The pair finally grow silent after a while. They sit at the now empty dinner table, face to face, while talking of her final moments and how she passed away smiling and thinking of him. Yu yet again smiles bitterly, but in gratitude and reminiscing of the caring old lady. They decide to bury her in the ground right outside the house and pay their end respects in a sorrowful mannerism. Yu promises to return every now and then with stories and tales galore, for her to listen to. While Nina promises to look after Yu, in her stead, and has promised to safeguard his journey of life itself. They decide to leave the village since Stella was no more here. They gather a few necessities and walk away from their lovely companion's abode. Solemnly walking through the Resser village, when they get called out by a bunch of bystanders. the guild receptionist and a few other villagers. He demands answers while asking if they were running away after they catered for them. Even if you was to leave, Nina must stay back, was what they wished to imply. Nina was the only strong adventurer the village had. Her absence would cost them quite dearly. The pair replies that since Stella no longer exists, there's nothing holding them down to the village itself. The villagers, now confused, question who she was, refusing to believe it, but as an oblivious lie. When you moves to hit the man, Nina apprehends his movements, asking him to cede his anger. They decide to move to Kamar, a village quite further away, probably on foot since a carriage would be costly considering their finance. Kamar is a vast city where multiple races coexist. There's even a labyrinth which garners the attention of adventurers from innumerable places. A speeding carriage rushes past them, and suddenly something gets thrown off. A girl of a short stature with a crooked cane. The carriage stops for a moment and a few people call out to her, referring to her as Pot, but then speeds away towards the horizon, leaving her behind. She giddies upright and calls out to you and Nina, asking them to be in awe, since she was a magical genius. You tries to scurry away while Nina is amazed at the fact that she not only is a magician but also a genius. He uses his magical eye to deduce her information. He finds out she is capable of black and white magic, while her physical prowess are almost similar to that of any normal child. She, being a genius, concludes he possesses a magic eye. Yu is thrown off guard since none but he knew of it. He tries to overlay the fact speaking of it as a skill, but the genius refutes, saying that the magic around the user fluctuates on usage of a skill, and ascertains her conclusion once again. Finally left with no option, Yu inquires of what she wants since his secret was now revealed. The genius, now cover-blown Lena, requests companionship, demanding that they travel together. A tsundere like Yu declines while Nina, as always, accepts. Shortly after, when they're camping in the forest at night, they're alarmed of some approximately 60 night wolves approaching them. Yu, equipped with his long sword, Nina with her daggers and Lena with her magic, annihilate the entire pack, deciding eventually to sell the fangs acquired. When Yu asserts his unwillingness to carry any extra weight, Lena furnishes a bag, which Nina gets shocked at the sight of. It was but an item pouch, an expensive module which cost quite a fortune of 10 gold coins even for the cheapest variant. Yu asks what would she do if they ran off with it, to which she replies that she trusts them. He yet again steals a glance at her, thinking of something unknown to us readers. After gathering the fangs, Lena asks Yu to teach him his chantless magic, while she in turn would teach him magic besides the fireball of his. With nothing to lose, he agrees. Nina, on the other, practices alongside Lena. After spending a few days walking, chewing frogs, and from exhaustion of the punctual practices, they finally sight the Kamar city. Lena and Nina, motivated, look forward to their party, to become the best in the city, while our protagonist Yu, on the other hand, stands in with complete denial. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The trio is awestruck seeing beast folk and elves in the new city. They decide to foremost find an inn to stay at and eventually the guild where would register as adventurers. They reserve a 2-bedroom with a joint washroom, with plans to rest a while before proceeding to the guild. After a brief soak, the group moves to the guild. They're greeted by a cheerful receptionist to whom Yu shows his previous guild card issued in the Resser village. It apparently was fake. Issuing fake guild cards was an implication of unfair payments and is considered a serious crime amongst the guild executives. Yu knew of this beforehand thanks to his magical eye. With all the predicaments he was forced to go through, he wasn't planning to spare the previous receptionist. When he found out Nina wasn't good at literature, he plans to teach her sometime soon. After they submit their applications, and await further notice, an adventurer heavily equipped with a very superior set of equipments and skill set approaches them, asking them to either cancel their applications or, even better, return to their previous village. End of chapter 8.1. That's it for the manga as of year 2018. The updates on this specific manga have been ceased since 5 years now, and I create this video in hopes to get it back on track. It is quite a potent and deserving manga. Signing off in positive hopes. Do upvote this video if you wish the same and leave a comment to let me know. For more content, do consider subscribing.